Hello and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be drawing the Greek goddess Artemis and talk about some of her myths and who she is. Artemis is a Greek goddess of the hunt, wilderness, the moon, archery, wild animals, vegetation, chastity, and childbirth. She's one of the 12 Olympian gods that live on Mount Olympus. Her abilities include a perfect aim with the bow and arrow, the ability to turn herself or others into animals, the power of healing, and control over disease. Artemis' story begins with her birth. The goddess's parents were Zeus, who's the king of all gods, god of the sky, lightning, and thunder, and Leto, who was a titan. Titans were pretty much immortal beings that came before the gods. And if you don't know, Zeus is married to Hera, who is a goddess of women, marriage, and childbirth, and Zeus has a lot of love affairs with other women, which enrages Hera quite a bit. This is one of those cases. When Leto was ready to give birth, Hera cursed her so that Leto couldn't find a stable place on Earth to give birth. Then, a floating island called Delos appeared. In some versions of the myth, Zeus called on his brother Poseidon, who's a god of the sea, to make the island, and he did so with a thrust of his trident. The name Delos means appearance or apparent in ancient Greek, signifying the apparent appearance of the island. There, Leto gave birth to Artemis, and Artemis helped her mom give birth to her twin brother Apollo. Now onto the goddess's childhood. On Artemis's 3rd birthday, she asked her father Zeus for 6 wishes. The first was to forever remain a virgin. The second was to have many names to set her apart from her brother Apollo. The third was to be the Phaesporia, or the light bringer. The fourth was for a bow and arrow and a knee-length tunic so she could hunt. Most women in ancient Greece wore longer tunics at the time, so that explains why she had to wish for a shorter one. The 5th wish was to have 60 daughters of Okeanos, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, that were all 9 years of age to be her choir. To break this down, the daughters of Okeanos were known as cloud nymphs. And she also wished for 20 Amenicide nymphs to look over her dogs and bow while she rested. Amenicide nymphs were Naiad nymphs of the river of Amnisus, and Naiads in Greek mythology were nymphs of flowing water, or springs, rivers, fountains, and lakes. The last wish was to have the mountains as her domain. Zeus granted all of her wishes. Also, all the nymphs that were given to Artemis remained chaste along with the goddess that they served. There are many myths and stories about the goddess Artemis, so I'm just going to talk about a few of them. One of her most famous myths is of her and Orion. Orion was a handsome young huntsman who was out hunting one day and just happened to stumble across the goddess. They quickly grew close and became each other's hunting companions. They would challenge each other to races and archery contests and would talk to each other during the nighttime. Apollo, who is Artemis's twin brother, feared that Artemis would fall in love with Orion and break her vow of chastity, so he created a plan to tear them apart. He sent a giant scorpion to go after Orion. Orion put up a fight. The scorpion and Orion had an epic battle, but Orion was losing, and he knew if he didn't want to die, his only option to survive was to swim away, because the ocean was behind him, so he could escape that way. So the scorpion backed the hunter up to the sea, and Orion started to swim away. While this was happening, Apollo visited Artemis and made up a story or big lie about how a man did something really bad to one of her priestesses, and he was swimming away in hopes of escaping the goddess's wrath and punishment. Burning with anger, Artemis raced to the sea to shoot the man, who Apollo framed as Orion. So basically, Orion did nothing bad. Apollo is just making up this ginormous lie about how he did do something bad so that he could get Artemis to turn on her best friend and kill him. And it worked because that's what happened. And after Artemis killed Orion, she realized who he was and what Apollo had done, and she was overcome with grief for the loss of her best friend. In order to honor their friendship, she put an image of his body in the stars as a constellation. And I added that constellation in this drawing later on. In the image, it appears right above Artemis's head. There are quite a few myths about Artemis being very displeased with people boasting about being better than her in some way, and this isn't just for this goddess, this is for all the gods. There's so many myths about people being punished for like being too arrogant. And this one is about a woman who boasted about being more fortunate than Artemis's mother. Niobe was a woman who had 7 sons and 7 daughters, so 14 children in total. That's a lot. She boasted about how more fortunate she was than Leto, who is Artemis and Apollo's mother, since she had more children than her, and Leto only had 2, Artemis and Apollo. Artemis and Apollo were both enraged by this, and thus came down to Earth to kill all 14 of her children. Artemis killed all the daughters, and Apollo killed all the sons. Niobe then went to Mount Syphilis and was turned to stone. This is actually a real place on Earth. There's a rock that looks like a woman who is weeping there, which has been associated with this myth in ancient times. It's called the Weeping Rock. The next myth has a heroic moment for Artemis. So basically, Poseidon, who's a god of the sea, has these twin sons who were giants named Otis and Ephialtes. These guys wanted to take over Mount Olympus, which is the home of the gods and the location of the throne of Zeus, who's the king of all gods. Otis liked Artemis and Ephialtes liked Hera, and they had a goal of getting to them. Ares, who's the god of war, tried to stop them, but the giants defeated him and put him in a bronze urn on an island. Artemis came to that island and told the giants that Otis could have her if they let Ares go. The giants started arguing, since Ephialtes got nothing out of this deal, but Otis did. Artemis then transformed into a stag and ran in between the giants. Both of the giants threw their spears at the same time in hopes of striking the goddess. However, their plan failed because Artemis was able to dodge the weapons. And since the giants were standing across from each other, and they were also facing each other, the twins unintentionally struck each other dead instead. The last story I wanted to share about Artemis is of her part in the Trojan War. Just before King Agamemnon ventured out to go to Troy, he killed a sacred stag of Artemis and boasted that his hunting skills were better than hers. That is something you should never do in Greek mythology, because there are so many myths about people being arrogant and boasting about how they're better than a certain god or goddess, and then it doesn't end well for them. So Artemis calmed the seas which the king and his crew were traveling on, which stopped their voyage to Troy since their ship couldn't move. An oracle, which is a woman from ancient Greece who spoke prophecies, told the king that he had to sacrifice his oldest daughter to the goddess as an apology and to show his remorse. So he went along with the plan, but Artemis, being the protector and patron of young girls, swapped the daughter with a stag at the sacrificial altar and made the daughter a priestess. Now, after talking a lot and hearing about the goddess Artemis, I wanted to point some things out in the drawing I made of her. In ancient Greece, the goddess was often depicted as a young girl with a hunting bow and a quiver of arrows. And as seen from the myth about her and her 6 wishes, she wears a knee-length tunic. Artemis is also often associated with stags, so I drew one right behind her and one at the edge of the hill. I also drew a young girl at the top of the hill as well, since the goddess is a protector of them. In the distance on the mountains, I drew a temple, since that was a place of worship for many Greeks, and Artemis had temples dedicated to her. First, I drew a full moon behind her head, since she is a goddess of the moon, but after doing a bit more research, I found out that she is more associated with a crescent moon, so I changed that later on in the image. Also, right above the moon is the constellation of Orion's Belt. I'm no astronomer, so I have no idea if there's like a correct placement in the sky or whatever, but that was the spot with the most sky showing from behind the trees, so that's why I drew it there. I created this scene to take place in a forest, since that is where Artemis hangs out a lot of times, and in a mountain range, as you can see from the background, since that is her domain. Now for the lore aspect of the image. Honestly, interpret it how you want. It doesn't really have a set story behind it, but here are a few of my thoughts while making the image. Since Artemis likes to get revenge on people who disrespect her or come at her followers, I wanted to show her acting on this vengeance. Since she is a huntress and often kills people in her myths, I wanted her to look a bit lethal and like she's aiming to shoot something or someone perhaps. but she isn't totally vengeful since she protects young girls and people who are devoted to her. So I wanted to show that caring side of her by placing a young maiden, who she is most well known for protecting, behind her. The girl has her back turned in order to show her trust in the goddess and so that the girl isn't tortured by the sight of her protector killing someone. There is an arrow stuck in the ground behind Artemis, which could indicate someone was trying to shoot her, or maybe the girl, or maybe even one of the stags. Those are just a bit of my thoughts while making the image, but you interpret it how you want to interpret it. I hope you enjoyed this video and liked the final image of the goddess Artemis. Liking this video would really mean a lot to me, and subscribe if you want to see more of my content. Also, comment down below any cool historical or mythological people that you might want to see me draw next. Bye!